3,000 years ago, in the humid lands of what is now southern Mexico, a civilization most people have never heard of crushed the seeds of a strange tropical fruit, mixed them with water and chili peppers, and created a bitter, foamy drink they believed connected humans to the gods. That civilization was the Olmec, and the drink they invented would eventually become the most craved food product on the planet, generating over $130 billion every single year. But the journey from sacred jungle ritual to the candy aisle at your local grocery store is one of the strangest, bloodiest, and most unlikely stories in human history. To understand where chocolate came from, you need to go back roughly 1,500 years before the Common Era. The Olmec civilization, often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica, thrived in the tropical lowlands along the Gulf of Mexico. These were the people who carved those massive stone heads you may have seen in history textbooks. And deep in their territory, cacao trees grew wild in the shaded understory of the rainforest. The Olmec figured out something that would change the course of civilization. If you fermented the pulp surrounding cacao seeds, dried and roasted those seeds, you could grind them into a paste that produced a drink unlike anything else in nature. The earliest archaeological evidence of cacao use comes from pottery vessels found in Honduras, with residue traces dating back over 3,000 years. And to the Olmec, this was not some casual beverage. This was something sacred. When the Olmec civilization declined, their knowledge of cacao did not disappear. It passed directly to the Maya, who took chocolate and turned it into something even more central to their culture. The Maya word for cacao is actually where our modern term comes from. And for the Maya, this drink was woven into virtually every important moment of life. Birth ceremonies, marriage rituals, funerals, religious offerings to the gods. Cacao appears in Maya art, in their hieroglyphs, and in their creation mythology. The Popol Vuh, the sacred Maya text, describes cacao as one of the foods the gods used to create human beings. They did not just enjoy chocolate. They believed humanity was literally made from it. But the Maya did not drink chocolate the way you imagine. There was no sugar. There was no milk. Maya chocolate was a thick, bitter, sometimes gritty drink made from ground cacao paste mixed with water, cornmeal, chili peppers, and vanilla. They poured the liquid back and forth between vessels to create a prized layer of foam on top. That foam was considered the most valuable part of the drink. Cacao beans themselves became so precious that they were used as currency throughout Mesoamerica. You could buy a turkey for 100 cacao beans, a slave for about 1,000. Money literally grew on trees. When the Aztec Empire rose to power in central Mexico during the 1400s, cacao was already the most coveted commodity in the region. But here is the twist. Cacao trees cannot grow in the dry, high-altitude climate around the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs had built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in the Americas, but they could not grow their own chocolate. So they did what empires do. They conquered the regions where cacao grew and demanded it as tribute. Massive quantities flowed into Tenochtitlan from conquered provinces. Some estimates suggest the empire collected nearly 200 loads of cacao beans per year in tribute alone, each load weighing roughly 50 pounds. Emperor Montezuma II reportedly drank as many as 50 cups of chocolate a day served in golden goblets. The Aztec version of the drink was called socolotl, which roughly translates to bitter water. And just like the Maya before them, the Aztecs believed cacao had divine origins. Their mythology held that the god Quetzalcoatl had brought cacao to earth and was punished by the other gods for sharing something so precious with mortals. Warriors drank chocolate before battle. Priests used it in ceremonies. It was offered to sacrificial victims before their deaths as a final act of reverence. Chocolate was not candy. It was blood, spirit, and empire in a single cup. In 1519, a Spanish conquistador named Hernán Cortés arrived on the coast of Mexico with around 500 soldiers, and everything changed. When Cortés and his men first encountered the Aztec court, they were offered cups of zocolotl. The Spanish hated it. One early account described the drink as something fit more for pigs than for people. But Cortés was not interested in the taste. He was interested in the economics. He quickly realized that cacao beans were the currency of an entire empire. And whoever controlled the cacao controlled the wealth. After the fall of the Aztec Empire in 1521, the Spanish began shipping cacao back to Spain. And here comes the detail nobody noticed at the time. Someone, likely Spanish nuns in colonial convents in Guatemala or Mexico, started experimenting with the recipe. They added sugar, they added cinnamon and vanilla, they heated it up instead of serving it cold. And suddenly, that bitter Aztec warrior drink became something entirely different. It became sweet, warm, and dangerously addictive. Spain kept their modified chocolate recipe a closely guarded secret for nearly a century. While the rest of Europe had no idea what they were missing, the Spanish aristocracy was quietly obsessing over this new luxury drink behind closed doors. The secret eventually leaked out. By the early 1600s, chocolate had spread to Italy, France, and England, and European elites lost their minds over it. In France, King Louis XIV's wife, Maria Theresa of Spain, was so obsessed that she drank chocolate multiple times a day. The French court followed her lead, and soon hot chocolate was the fashionable drink of Versailles. In 1657, the first chocolate house opened in London. These were essentially the Starbucks of the 17th century, but far more exclusive. Chocolate houses became gathering places for the wealthy, the powerful, and the politically connected. Some of England's most famous institutions started as chocolate houses. White's, founded in 1693 as a hot chocolate shop, became one of the most exclusive gentlemen's clubs in the world and is still operating today. Meanwhile, doctors across Europe were prescribing chocolate as medicine for everything from stomach ailments to sadness. But chocolate had a problem. For over 2 centuries after arriving in Europe, it existed only as a drink and it was expensive. Producing drinkable chocolate from raw cacao beans required intense labor. The beans had to be roasted, shelled, and ground by hand, resulting in a thick, greasy paste that was difficult to dissolve. Chocolate was a luxury for the rich, and it was going to stay that way until someone figured out how to make it cheaper. That someone arrived in 1828. A Dutch chemist named Coenraad Johannes van Houten invented a hydraulic press that could squeeze most of the natural fat, known as cocoa butter, out of roasted cacao beans. What remained was a dry cake that could be pulverized into a fine powder. Van Houten also treated this powder with alkaline salts to reduce its bitterness, a process still called Dutching to this day. This was a revolution. The same ingredient that had been a luxury for centuries could now be produced faster, cheaper, and in far greater quantities. But Van Houten's invention did something even more important that he probably never anticipated. By separating cocoa butter from cocoa solids, he created the two key ingredients that would make solid chocolate possible. In 1847, a British company called J.S. Fry and Sons figured out that if you took cocoa powder, added sugar, and mixed it back with melted cocoa butter, the result was a smooth paste that hardened into a solid bar. They called it eating chocolate, the first modern chocolate bar the world had ever seen. For 3,000 years, chocolate had been a drink. In one afternoon in a Bristol factory, it became something you could hold in your hand, break into pieces, and eat wherever you wanted. The next 30 years were an explosion of invention. In 1875, a Swiss man named Daniel Peter had been trying for 8 years to mix milk with chocolate. The problem was that milk contains water, and water causes chocolate to seize up and become grainy. Peter could not crack it. Then his neighbor, a man named Henri Nestle, showed him a product he had recently invented, a powdered condensed milk. Peter combined Nestle's milk with chocolate, and milk chocolate was born. Yes, that Nestle, the same company. 4 years later, in 1879, another Swiss chocolatier named Rodolphe Lindt accidentally left his mixing machine running overnight. When he came back in the morning, he discovered that the extended mixing had produced chocolate with a velvety texture unlike anything anyone had tasted before. He called the process conching. It is still the standard process used in chocolate manufacturing today. In the early 1900s, a caramel maker from Pennsylvania named Milton Hershey visited the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago and saw German chocolate making machinery in action. He was so captivated that he sold his caramel company for $1 million and bet everything on chocolate. Hershey's genius was not in making the best chocolate. He knew that Swiss and Belgian chocolatiers had him beat on quality. His genius was in making chocolate cheap enough that every single person in America could afford to buy it. Hershey built an entire town around his factory. Streets named Chocolate Avenue and Cocoa Avenue, schools, parks, trolleys, and amusement park. The Hershey bar, introduced in 1900, became the first mass-produced, mass-marketed chocolate bar in the United States. And then came something nobody predicted. Chocolate went to war. During World War II, the United States military commissioned Hershey to produce a special chocolate bar for soldiers. The requirements were specific. It had to weigh 4 ounces, be high in energy, withstand high temperatures, and this part is strange, it had to taste just barely better than a boiled potato. The military did not want soldiers eating their emergency rations as snacks. They wanted them saved for survival. Hershey produced over 3 billion of those bars over the course of the war. 3 billion. And when American troops liberated towns across Europe and the Pacific, they handed out chocolate to children and civilians. An entire generation around the world got their first taste of chocolate from an American soldier. After the war, consumption exploded globally. But here comes the part the industry spent decades trying to hide. Roughly 70% of the world's cacao is grown in West Africa, with Ivory Coast and Ghana alone producing more than half the global supply. Most producers are smallholder farmers working plots smaller than 5 acres, and many of those farms rely on child labor. Reports have documented over 1 million children working in hazardous conditions on cacao farms in Ivory Coast and Ghana. Children as young as 5 years old using machetes, carrying heavy loads, exposed to dangerous pesticides. In 2001, major chocolate companies signed a protocol pledging to eliminate the worst forms of child labor from their supply chains. Over 2 decades later, the problem persists. The irony is brutal. A product that brings so much pleasure to hundreds of millions of consumers depends on a supply chain where the people who grow the raw ingredient often cannot afford to buy the finished product. Think about the full arc of this story. A jungle fruit that an ancient civilization believed was divine became the currency of an empire. The secret pleasure of European kings, fuel for the Industrial Revolution. A comfort ration for soldiers at war, and eventually the most universally craved flavor on the planet. Chocolate has been money, medicine, ritual, weapon, and gift. It has built fortunes, destroyed ecosystems, and connected cultures separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years. The Olmec grinding cacao in the tropical lowlands of Mexico 3,000 years ago could never have imagined a world where their sacred drink would be freeze-dried into powder, molded into bunny shapes, stuffed inside croissants, drizzled over ice cream, and sold in bags at airport convenience stores. And yet, despite all the changes, something fundamental has not changed. The reason chocolate captivates us in the 21st century is the same reason it captivated the Maya. There is something about the combination of compounds inside cacao, the theobromine, the phenylethylamine, the anandamide, over 600 distinct flavor compounds, that triggers a response in the human brain that no other food can quite match. A chemical cocktail that evolution spent millions of years perfecting and that humans stumbled onto in the jungles of Central America 30 centuries ago. And the next time you break off a piece of a chocolate bar, you might think about it just a little bit differently. If this story surprised you, drop a comment below telling me what country or city you are watching from and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this one coming, and you are going to want to be here for them.